The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, hello. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Colin McNaughton. I'm a Principal Technical Marketing Manager for Ansible Automation Platform here at Red Hat, and I'm joined by Brian from F5 Networks. Brian, you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah, my name's Brian Ehlert. I'm a Senior Technical Product Manager over at F5 Networks, specifically with NGINX and on the NGINX Controller team.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Brian. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a note that this session is being recorded, and all attendees here today will receive links to the recording and content at the conclusion of the webinar. So now that that's out of the way, so today we're going to be talking about Ansible Collections and how NGINX is using Ansible Collections to deliver certified automation to their product. But before we get into highlighting the work that NGINX has put into this effort, we need to talk about how Ansible content is being delivered today, how that is changing coming up. There was actually a new announcement this morning that we can talk about as well, and then make a proper introduction to Ansible Collections for those who have joined us here today. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what it looks like today with Ansible 2.9. It's being delivered as an RPM. You can do pip install, but today when you run pip install, there's a lot of different automation content that is installed along with the executable of Ansible or Ansible playbook or something. And so that content looks like it's content types of like plugins and modules, etc. So if you did a pip install today on Ansible 2.9, you would have maybe 4,500 different items when you actually go to install Ansible. Now, that is very convenient because everything is being delivered along with Ansible, but it's also difficult to maintain. We've seen this issue. So it's great for stability, but it's hard for community members to maybe develop new content because the release cadence of Ansible is between 6 to 9 months between these releases. So what we're doing going forward with Ansible 2.10 base is actually we're going to pull out the Ansible content from the base distribution of Ansible itself. So Ansible 2.10 base will look like a slimmed down version about, if we run a pip install on Ansible 2.10 base, we'll have about 200 and 250 items. And all the content will then be packaged as collections that we can pull back into Ansible. So there's a benefit here, especially for somebody like F5 Networks and NGINX, creating their collection. Typically if there's like maybe a bug in a module that's being developed by a third party or community member or something, and then being distributed with Ansible, there's going to be like a 6 to 9 month lead time before that's actually going to be delivered to the end user. So that puts us in a position where we need to deliver a hot fix or something, or wait for community accept the patch and then the release of Ansible itself, 6 to 9 months down the road. So by separating our content out and packaging it along with other different types of content, we'll talk about those different types of content in a moment here, we're able to move much faster and create new collections and deliver new features through existing collections that we have available today. Next slide, please. All right, so as we're building Ansible 2.10 base, this is sort of what it looks like, right? So step one was to break out that content from the Ansible distribution. Step two is to make it consumable. So we're also going to introduce Ansible 2.10. That's I'm really just dropping the base from that name. Right? So if Ansible 2.10 base is the slimmed down version, then we can layer on collections after the fact. Ansible 2.10 is those collections layered on and then redelivered as Ansible 2.10. So there still is an option for Ansible consumers to go in and pull down, a single RPM or pip install of Ansible 2.10, which includes all of the collections that are published available for Ansible. So Ansible 2.10 is really just Ansible collections like reintegrated on top of Ansible 2.10 base. And the announcement that came out this morning, Ansible 2.10 base just released a beta this morning. So if you're interested in seeing how this and this how the Ansible content being pulled away from the Ansible distribution, how that looks and works and feels, you can actually go and start testing that out today. And I would definitely highly encourage somebody to go out and test that. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about what an Ansible collection is. If I'm going to give it, a simple definition of an Ansible collection, it's just a simplified and consistent content schema. It's a way to deliver Ansible content that we've talked about as being pulled away from the Ansible binaries. So, today we're already familiar with roles and plugins and modules. These are all different Ansible content types, right? Ansible collections are pulling all of these different content types together and giving them a single version number. So, typically in the past, if we were going to be sharing Ansible content, we're typically sharing roles, and those roles were being distributed either independently over like GitHub repositories or Ansible Galaxy. But now, instead of just roles, we're also distributing plugins and modules as well. And so this kind of goes back to, if there's a bug in a module, now I just have to republish the module, rebuild the collection, and redistribute that collection apart from the Ansible executable. I'm not really dependent on that release cadence of Ansible anymore. So it's a standardized way to organize and package this content. Next slide. So if step one was, pulling away that content, step two would be simplifying the distribution channels. And so we still have Ansible Galaxy for everybody already familiar with distributing roles. That's primarily primarily the job of Ansible Galaxy. And this is, a community supported site. It's definitely going to continue to be around. This is more of like the upstream, right? Sometime over the past year, it was also modified to work alongside the collections framework. So we can already build and publish Ansible collections on galaxy.ansible.com. And this is really sort of, tagged as the latest and greatest, or, bleeding edge, whatever you want to call it. This is where, all collections will exist in any form, stable or otherwise, right? So if anybody wants to be on the bleeding edge, wants to pull the latest and greatest, you're pulling your collections from Ansible Galaxy. Now, on the other side, there is sort of the downstream productized version included with all Ansible Automation Platform subscriptions, and that is Ansible Automation Hub. So this one is hosted at cloud.redhat.com, available for anybody with a subscription for Ansible Automation Platform. And this is where we find our certified and jointly supported Ansible content collections, jointly supported by Red Hat and the partner like NGINX. We also benefit from analytics here, where we can see, how exactly our modules or collections are being used within our organization. And there's a lot of other things, other pieces of the subscription for Ansible Automation Platform that are exposed as managed services, like Ansible Automation Hub here on cloud.redhat.com. But this is where you're going to find sort of the slow and steady and stable releases of these content collections that are certified and supported by both Red Hat and the partner. All right, next slide, please. So here's just a distribution example for the specific collection that we're going to be talking about today. So the collections exist both on Ansible Galaxy and Ansible Automation Hub. And Automation Hub, if we pull it there, we know it's stable, certified, supported, tested, all of the above, right? To access these things, there's sort of like a common method to pulling this. Anytime we're pulling a new collection, we're going to reference it by its fully qualified collection name, FQCN, right? So you can see in the first example of the URL for both galaxy.ansible.com and cloud.redhat.com, you can see the namespace called out /collection. And that's how, if you actually go to galaxy.ansible.com/NGINX Inc. /NGINX_controller, that's where you'll be able to access this collection. The same thing if you're an Ansible automation platform subscriber, you also have the similar path on Ansible Automation Hub. Namespace is sort of like the top level like identifier for that vendors or that partner's collection, right? So that's why you see NGINX Inc. .NGINX_controller. And then if you wanted to go further than that, you could specify a specific content type like a role or a module. And so you can see at the bottom there, I've specified NGINX_controller install, and that's a role within the module. All right, and next slide, please. All right, so step one was separating the Ansible content from the executable. Step two was our distribution channels. Well, step three is actually using the thing, right? So we have 7 steps here. This is sort of like the developer story if I'm going to start creating my own collection. So I'm using the Ansible Galaxy command line interface. Ansible Galaxy, for in this instances might be a little bit confusing. I mean, we're interacting with either Ansible Galaxy or Ansible Automation Hub here. This is just the command line interface for interacting with collections. So if I wanted to just create my brand new collection, I could say Ansible Galaxy collection init foo, where foo is my namespace, and bar, where bar is my module, my collection name. So that will create a new skeleton for me to work from. It creates all the directories that will contain my roles and my plugins and my modules and things like that. It has like a README and metadata about this collection and all that stuff. I also have sanity, unit, and integration testing available through Ansible Test. And once everything tests and passes and everything looks great, I can build the collection using Ansible Galaxy collection build. And what the collection is, it's just a tarball. It's a compressed. It's an archive, like a zip file, right? And so it's just compressing all of these directories down and authoring a new tarball, which represents our collection. So that's what happens under build. Under collection publish, now I can either push this out to Ansible Galaxy or Ansible Automation Hub. And then if I'm the user, if I want to go back and consume this collection now from one of those two places, I say Ansible Galaxy collection install foo, where foo is in the namespace, .bar, where bar is the collection name. So that's it. That's just a quick story of where Ansible is today, how it's now separating content out, how it's delivering new Ansible content, why that's better, and what actually is an Ansible collection. So I'm going to pass it back over to Brian for the fun part. But certainly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat or Q&A function, and we can follow up a bit later. So next slide, and hand it over to Brian. Thank you.
All right, so the incredible handoff slide. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about NGINX Controller and how we're using collections and how we've developed some collections, and we're supporting those for customers for use with Controller as well as with NGINX and NGINX Plus. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with NGINX, the open source version of NGINX. The primary focus of today is actually we're going to be taking advantage of Plus under the hood. We're not going to be integrating with Plus very much. We're not going to be dealing with it very much. I mean, there's a lot of patterns that are out there that folks are already working with NGINX Plus and NGINX to push configurations, maintain their nginx.conf files. But we're going to be focusing today on Controller. And Controller is really a higher level way to orchestrate NGINX Plus across our ecosystem. So whether you're focusing on ADC load balancing scenarios, you're looking for some analytics, you want to take advantage of API management, you want to take advantage of our upcoming security modules or our upcoming service mesh capabilities. So those are things that Controller can help centralize for you within your environment. And a lot of the big benefit is that we can pull in all your various teams, and they can interface through Controller, and they can also act upon various aspects of the configuration that might affect your instances. And Controller takes care of preventing conflicts and preventing one team from stepping on another team's toes and making sure that the resulting configuration that gets pushed down in the end is actually good and solid and workable. So whether we're deploying into bare metals or containers or machines, or what cloud we're working at, or even what type of role. So as we look at the data plane, I mean, you can use NGINX for a lot of purposes. You might focus on a reverse proxy. You might focus on ingress controller if you're working on the Kubernetes side. You might focus on just the web app, the app server. You might have content delivery network scenarios. You might have any different types of roles that you're actually using NGINX for across your enterprise. And controller is a way to bring that all together, to bring it into your lines of business, and to grant self-service across your various components. So just to kind of bring that message back, we do have an app-centric point of view, and I'll get to that in a minute when we start to push configurations. We've got an API. We've put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into our API, so there's a lot of logic to it. We're really focused on enabling teams to grant self-service. So somebody owns controller as a piece of infrastructure in your enterprise, and the whole goal is that it's out there and teams can interact with it directly, and they can use that as the interface instead of necessarily having to have 10 billion meetings and hash things out that way. They can each do their point of input and move forward with things. And we're going to get to the fun part, as Colin mentioned. I've got a workflow here as soon as I flip between my windows. But first, I wanted to go ahead. Colin had mentioned the automation hub. So the controller collection is up in automation hub. As you can see, there's versions. I'll get to that a little bit later. You can also find it available in Galaxy. And the way we've got our roles structured out is this is just a collection of roles today. The full README's here. There's a number of roles that are actually part of this collection, whether it be installing controller, so when you want to manage the installation, stand it up really quickly through POC, handling your licensing within controller, so when you get your trial license in there, move your production. Our generate token, you'll see me reusing this one quite a bit because we have an ephemeral API token that we use with the interface. Installing our agent, handling certificate management through there, standing up your gateway configurations, doing your application configurations, component configurations, and other items within our object model. Those are broken out as individual roles because we recognize those as individual tasks, because more than likely you have different individuals responsible for those different aspects of configuration within your environment, and we want to make sure that those line up from a task perspective with who might be doing it, who might be performing actions for you. And one of the things we'll get to, there is a collection of examples that we're going to be working through. So I'll bring up VS Code in a little bit and we'll actually poke through this. But I've got these samples out there, so you can go through these. You can copy these. You can adapt them. You can always put back to them too if you figure out something I did was incorrect, or you've got a better solution for that. So I'm open to all of that at any point in time. All right. All right, where's my taskbar? Actually, let me go ahead and get that window right out of the way. And pull this one back over here. All right. In this case, I'm going to be doing Ansible Tower. And as we talk through here, I'm going to show a few different things. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy some instances into AWS. This happens to be my AWS account and my instances. I've got a couple of machines here. I can tell by my naming scheme. These are what I'm using for an object that we'll call a gateway. And we're going to go through and we're going to deploy some additional gateways and link those over to controller. So for that, I've got this workflow here where I'm standing up rel, we can get that to open, as gateway instances. We'll zoom in on that a little bit so we can see what I've got going on here. But this workflow is just deploying a number of additional job templates for me. So I have one that adds the instances. I have another one that refreshes a cloud inventory for me. I've got an approval process in there. So I've just got a gate that allows me to talk through the demo. I'm adding then NGINX Plus. I layer that onto those instances. I add the controller agent onto those instances. I've got another point here where we can either have a job approval or something like that. I remove a tag that I'm actually using because I use that to drive some of these other ones in my inventory. And then I go ahead and refresh my inventory. And let's go ahead and close this visualizer. And I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. I want to add 2 more instances. I'm going to put those in the US East 2 region because I like Ohio. The production US East name, my instance type, they can be relatively small, my keys, my subnet, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to kick that off. And we're going to let that run a little bit in the background. And while that's going, I'm actually going to talk to some of the things that are going on there. So that's under this controller gateway instances folder. And we're going to do a couple things here. So we're going to run the playbook that adds an instance. This is really simple. I just use the EC2 module, instance name, security groups. Part of what I'm doing here, though, that I'm taking advantage of is I tag it with my environment name. I tag it with that location designator that I put in there. Those are items that relate over to controller, so I can take advantage of those later on. I put just a key in there that says that this is a gateway. So if I go searching through AWS, I can easily see that this is a gateway. And I put another one in there that I'm actually using for the automation that says this is a new one. It's not yet linked to controller. It's not yet allocated to any configuration. So I've got a way to track that through my inventory. And I'm actually going through and renaming the name tag. Instead of dealing with the instance ID, I'm actually inserting the private DNS name there, and I'm inserting that later on too that you'll see. I followed that up with updating my inventory. We'll get over to my inventory in a minute. And then we go through and we install NGINX Plus. So let's go ahead and come back over here to Tower. While that's chugging along, the inventory that I'm working in this case is this gateway new inventory. Everybody's always got splats in their inventory. The key here is that I have a source set up, and the source is EC2, and I've got some filters set up in here. I'm filtering on that new gateway tag, EC2 source. I'm using my AWS credential, and I'm actually changing my inventory a little bit. I'm using that private DNS name as my inventory source. I'm using the private IP address. In this case, my Ansible host sits up in the same network. It's got private access to these instances. I don't have to worry about exposing, SSH over the internet or something like that. I'm keeping everything nice and tight and secure. And also, when we get over to the controller workflows, I've also established a credential in this particular environment. So I established a new credential type. You'll see a cheat for this in my examples too, for the input configuration and the injector configuration. So establish the credential type, and then I can come over to the credentials and I can establish my credential to this particular instance, which it just asks for an administrator name, the password behind that, and where the DNS endpoint is. Okay, you could have multiple instances of controller. You could have ephemeral instances of controller depending on your environment. So we don't force you into anything in particular there. I see that my job has reached a point here where my instances have been stood up. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to approve the installation of NGINX Plus and allow that to continue on its merry way. All right, so for installing NGINX Plus, I'm taking advantage of a couple things here. I actually have the certificate and repo and the certificate and key for the NGINX Plus repository stored as as a vault item. So it's protected. So it's protected through Ansible Vault for me. That can decrypt it, pass it in. Nobody needs access to that. Nobody needs to know what it is. It's just an encrypted YAML file, and we can pass that on through. And then I actually use, I add some patches in there. I've got some logic in there. I take advantage of my inventory. So this is dealing with that new gateway tag that I worked through with my inventory that I mentioned previously. I've got remote user in here since we've got some variations between Red Hat and Ubuntu. I install NGINX Plus into there, and as you can see, I'm referencing the specific role here from the namespace, the controller, and then NGINX. So we're including the NGINX role in the NGINX Controller collection. I'm going to change log rotate a little bit so we can deal with that. I have very, very small instances, and I want to make sure I don't fill up the drive on those with logs, as I use those for my demo. And then I actually clean up the repository keys that I pushed out to those. Now there is a variable file that's used to drive the NGINX role. So in this case, I'm enabling it, I'm telling it to start, I'm telling it to do plus. And this role actually takes care of, it's going to actually remove the repository and license from the remote. Okay, so my playbook removes it from the tower host where it had to be expanded in order for the role to use it, but the role can actually remove it and the repository from the remote host. And I'm going to enable the NGINX API, which is another thing, and I want to make sure the Node.js module is sitting there as well. So that's going to happen in the background. So the second thing that's going on with my workflow, and it's not quite there yet, I'll go ahead and click on jobs, is I'm going to install the agent and connect that over to my controller instance. So the credential that I had the FQDN in it, so I can fetch that as a variable as I use that credential through my pipeline. But once again, I'm referencing the role that's going to get used. I need an API key for that agent to use for registration, so I'm fetching that while this playbook happens to run on the tower side. Setting that to a fact. Once again, targeting my new gateway as the remote. At this point in time, I need to add Python support in there. And then we install the agent, and I'm passing a couple, so now I'm referencing the agent, and I pass a couple specific variables to there that we're going to see show up later. So that FQDN, okay, that I set as the DNS name, so the internal DNS name, I want to tag the host with that name. I want to make sure I pass that API key back through. So you'll see me referencing these from the previous execution where I'm changing the runtime context and passing that on through here. All right, how are we doing? All right, so it's still running, installing plus. So that's chugging along. Another pattern that you're going to see me do here as I work through some of these things is you'll see me use this requirements .yaml file. And so where Colin had mentioned running, install this particular collection, I'm actually not doing that with Tower. I'm actually relying on this requirements .yaml file. So I can go through, and I might be working through something in development, and I want to reference my Git repository because that's where I'm committing to at this point in time, and I'm not running Ansible locally to do the test. So I want to reference that Git repository and make sure that gets pulled in. I want to reference a role directly. So instead of collections here, I would have roles spelled out. I want to make sure I want a specific version. So I could actually come in here and I could type out a specific version that I wanted to do of a particular collection. That's something you might notice if you look at collections. They have versions to them, so you can pin yourself to a specific version or a point in time. Say we're moving forward with our roles and building compatibility for future versions, but you're just not consuming that new version of our product, and you want to stick to an older version that works with the version of the product that you're doing. So you want to pin to a specific version. So there's a lot of flexibility with using that requirements where it's not so binary. You don't have to worry that you've got the correct version installed on your Ansible hosts and a few other things that are going on there. All right, so how are we doing here? We're still running NGINX Plus. Let me double check that me changing context here didn't cause that to mess up. All right, so now it's working on the agent part of it. After the agent finishes, then we're going to see this show up in controller. We're going to see another point in the approval workflow, and then we can start to move forward and we can actually look at configurations. At this point in time, if we go back to our particular inventory that we're working with, and we start to look at the hosts here, you can see a little bit the information that's being pulled in here. So all the tagging information that's being put in here, all this group relationship that's coming from AWS over here. This is all pretty handy for us. So there's this unspecified location tag, there's the new gateway tag, but I've got machine size, I've got region in here, I've got my environment tag in here, I've got the name, the security group that it's associated with. So it's really easy to slice and dice from that perspective, what's going on from an inventory perspective. And it's much easier for me to maintain it because I just need to kick a refresh button in there and make sure that we get that installed. And as always, we can see the related jobs that are running in here, so we can take a look at these. And it's currently expanding that and running that. So as we kick in through here, we'll go back to our primary job. All right. Well, at least get to the point where these show up in controller for us, because I will need these machine names in a minute. But actually, right now I'm going to continue on. That'll show up for me. And there's my acceptance, my approval. So what this is going to do, this is a check for me to kind of pause, verify that things are in controller. So if you're in production and you're rolling out new boxes and you want to make sure that you've got some business rules, some gates in there, this is just an easy way for you to get the gates in there. So before we move on to config, this is just an indication to me that, oh, I should probably go over to controller. I should make sure that these instances have actually appeared in controller. At this point in time, I'm going to run with the assumption that they're going to show up okay. And I'm going to start to talk about the controller side of the configuration. So as we start to talk about, so I mentioned early on that we kind of break apart and we look at things from a different perspective. So we're always running with the assumption that we've got automation. We also bring in this notion of what's called an environment. So an environment you can think of as a playground that somebody's got access to. So you're always deploying into an environment. There are resources in that environment, such as certificates that you're allowed to use that are associated with a configuration. You've got applications, and applications are an abstract thing for us because it's not necessarily the application, but it's the component that are behind that application. So if you've got complex development teams, you're running microservices, you might have a developer team that's just specific for, for the cart and checkout process of your web service. That's a specific set of pods, that's a specific pipeline. It might have a specific security posture behind it. That's different from, say, the static content or the image content. And you might think of those as different components. And we've aligned our thinking along those ways. And then controller takes care of placing that configuration. So this concept of placement that we have and actually pushing it out to the instances. So we've got multiple instances, so those might be load balanced, those might be something else. So we can take care of that and we can move that on through. So if we take a look at, as I lose my taskbar. So if we take a look at now those configurations and we start to move through, we've got the gateway object. The playbook to deal with the gateway object is pretty simple, but we start to look at the variables that are associated with the gateway object. So when I take our JSON and I translate it into YAML, we can deal with, this trading application we're doing on this ingress. We've got the FQDN or DNS name that this is going to be servicing from a front-end perspective, because we always want to validate that traffic that's coming in. We want to throw away traffic that's not intended for trading.acmefinancial.net, for example, or that's going to go down to a different path. So we want to make sure we intercept that. We've got a certificate that's specific that we're going to use in this case, and I've got some variables in the path here, but we're going to do this trading acmefinancial.net certificate that I'll show you in a minute. We want to enforce TLS 1.3, and we want to put it on these specific instances that are in our unspecified location. We just have a generic location that we call unspecified. After that, we're going to move on to the application and whatnot. So when I take a look over at controller, okay, we've got these new instances I just put in here, and actually I should double check in AWS what these particular instances look like. So we just added 2 instances over here. So I believe it's 184 and 186. 184 and 186. Okay, so the naming convention comes through that I mentioned. So the FQDN comes through. You see that down here. This is the actual object name. So we've got a reference from the virtual over to the physical. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through a process of taking an application and promoting it. So currently we have this configuration underneath services here. We've got this trading.acmefinancial.net, and we've got this in our validation environment. We've been going through, we've been validating this, we've been testing it for days. And this validation environment, we're isolating from our production environment. But we want to take that configuration, move it over to production. So that gateway configuration that I just showed, it's the same configuration that we used in this environment. I'm going to migrate that over. The certificate that we have here, which is the trading certificate, this one currently sits underneath that, that validation environment. And we want to make a copy of this over in the production environment. This gateway that we're doing, again, it's allocated to the validation environment, and we want to have a copy of this in our production environment because we're ready to promote everything. So I have another workflow that's going to work through setting up these objects in a similar way to what we just did. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to up level this particular trading application. And we're going to go through and we're going to, I've established the environment already over in controller. So if we look at our environments, I've got this production environment. If I go into this production environment, our graphs are empty because there's nothing here. There's no applications here. There's no certificates here. There's no configurations in this environment yet. So that's what this workflow is going to do for me. It's going to go through and it's going to add the certificate. It's going to go through and configure the gateway. It's going to define that controller application that's linked to it, and it's going to define the components. So as you can imagine, I've got all these configurations sitting out there in GitHub. I've got my certificates sitting out there in GitHub. And in fact, I've got a nifty thing with certificates. So when I update the certificate repository in GitHub, so each certificate has its own repo. So that's going to push a webhook over on Tower, and that can update the certificate for me over in controller. So that's just an example of something that sounds relatively trivial, but you can take big advantage of it when you start to set up pipelines and whatnot. So we're going to do this production. Deceased. Make sure I did not typo that. And we're going to go on and pull out these last 2 instances that we have here. So 184 and 186. I'm just going to go ahead and copy their private IPs. Oh, actually, I need the name in this case because I need that DNS name. And I'm doing this copy here just as more of an example of linking things in here instead of trying to automate the whole thing, which might hide just a little too much of what I'm actually doing. So we'll go ahead and we'll kick that off. That's going to go through, it's going to actually update the repositories, make sure it's got the latest version. configurations, and then it's going to go through and push those through controller. And we're taking advantage of some of the roles here. So if we look at what's going on, so the gateway configuration, we look at what that does. It's using this collection, okay? So that namespace referencing pattern, I'm just doing it slightly different in this particular example, just to give you an idea of the various things that can go on here. So I'm referencing the collection. Then I'm going to use that generate token role. Okay, so my credential that I established early on has the variables that this generate token role requires. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the gateway role. Okay, and I'm already pulling through the variable files that I need. So I'm loading the variable files for the gateway itself, which happens to be in the same repo. So that's going to sit there. The certificate I'm kind of handling in a similar way. So we're going to load the certificate up. We're going to generate the token. We're going to load the vars. We're going to upsert the certificate object. And in this case, the variable file looks a little differently. So I'm just reading in the certificate itself. So I can maintain the certificate files themselves separate from the variable file. I don't have to crack them open and copy and paste them in here. I'm taking advantage of lookup to pull the details in at the time when it's necessary. Application. So similar, I've got the requirements.yaml. I've got my application definition in here. I've got my various components that are in here. In this case, I've got 4 different components. I know what my backends are, so I've got the backends or workloads configured. I've got a task to specifically update the app. I've got another task to specifically update the components, and it's going to go through and update all those things for me. So I don't need to take advantage of or care about it that much. My task here has finished. I come over here back to controller, which I just left that page open. My configuration has been moved over here. It's the identical configuration to what I have in the other environment. So controller is keeping the configuration separate, even though they might be identical. I have my source of truth over in GitHub, so we can take advantage of that. And I'm just moving those configurations into controller, doing my variable substitution at the point in time when I need to do that. All right. So I know that was an awful lot to talk through. I don't know if Colin's got any advice around anything that I'm doing here, or if we would like to go ahead and open that up to questions at this point in time.
Yeah, that was great. I don't think I have anything to add just at this moment. Why don't we go into Q&A if Elle has collected any? We can go through that now.
Yeah, so there's one question in here so far, and it says, I'm having issues with audio. And so, yeah, the recording will be shared. Sorry. Yes, this recording will be shared with you later in an email that will be sent out tomorrow. It'll have a link to the recording and the slide deck.
All right, cool. If there's no other questions in the queue at this point in time?
There's another one. It is, what is the GitHub repo you were using?
What GitHub repo was I using? And let's see if I can get my taskbar and make sure I grab the correct one. So the one I was showing in Visual Studio Code was actually this particular one. So GitHub, it's under my private repo, so Brian Elert, and it's this Ansible Tower NGINX Controller examples repo. I have another set of example repositories. So if you run into issues, people can reach out to me through GitHub, of course, or something like that. If you're a customer, you can reach out to me through formal channels. We've got other examples for other workflows that we can work through with controller as well, because there's a whole bunch of cases that we can get to with controller, and we're adding more. I'm building more roles as our capabilities at controller increase. So now that we've added locations in the latest release, I've got a location role. I'm going to be adding roles to manage integrations, which for controller, that's when we need a credential to talk to some external service, which you can imagine then you're going to see other capabilities coming into the product where we can send alerts and information out to external services and interface with external services. So we've got that there. Okay. Anything else?
That was it in the Q&A.
That was it. So given that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide for Colin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So yeah, just to reiterate, I would definitely go back out and check out Ansible Collections if you haven't. There's a lot of documentation already on how to work with collections, how to build collections, best practices around developing and testing collections on your own. Collections have been around for a little bit, so that's why documentation is definitely built out for that at the moment. Again, Ansible Base 2.10, there's a beta release this morning, so you can also see how we're pulling content away from the Ansible distribution itself. And then lastly, we have Ansible Fest coming up in October 13th to 14th. Predictably, it is a virtual event. But I'm still very excited about it, just as the main Ansible big stage event that we have every year. Call for papers, call for proposals is open, I believe, until July 15th, so about another month here. I know I've got a couple that I want to send in, and I would certainly encourage anybody that has some Ansible experience to definitely go in and look at submitting a talk. We're absolutely pushing involvement as well. And I think that's my final plug there. Again, this recording is going to be sent out. Thank you very much, Brian, for joining us here today. Thank you, Elle, for helping out, and thank you everybody for attending.
Awesome, thank you. And like I said, everything will be sent out soon, so we appreciate it, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week.